Sermon title, against the backdrop of that passage that Steve read for us, neither there nor there. Yesterday, before we entered into the tent for the town meeting, I was in a conversation with Zilly Buju on that corner, and Norm Eisler wandered by, and we were talking, and somebody asked Norm the question, has there ever been a town meeting before on the green? And I was waiting for Norm to pop out the answer like this, and Norm said, no, I don't know, which was a surprise to me, because there are very few things about Topsfield that Norm is not right on top of, at the history. So that is probably a question for our historians to dig into. And then afterwards I thought, you know, what happened in the tent here yesterday was typical of the situation in New England for very long, where you had the town meeting, the folk gathering to discuss the business of the town, and then on the next occasion, the church would gather in the same building or the same facility. That's why that structure over there is still called the meeting house by people in Topsfield. Most people from outside call it the church building, but we call it the meeting house, reflecting that tradition of town and church using the same building, which is fine. There was some other stuff going on with the merging of church and state that I think was not so healthy, but that's another discussion. And thinking about it, I thought, well, I can tell Norm that I can remember when we had a service on the green around that gazebo over there. And it was in the beginning of, or towards the end of March or in the middle of March. I can't remember the exact date and I didn't have time to look it up. But it was a very different service from this gathering on the green, because we were transitioning into life as a faith community, as a church, into the pandemic. A mask was still a strange thing. You know, we didn't know what exactly social distancing meant. We were all uncomfortable in each other's company, not knowing how far to stand away, not really knowing what to do with a mask, when to take it off, or how to speak. And there was a lot of anxiety, and frankly speaking, there was fear as well in those that gathered there. And I looked at the few souls who ventured out, taking the time out to gather while most of us were scurrying to get supplies and, you know, to prepare for what we don't know, what was coming. It was just something is not good, and you know, we just gather. But I looked at the gathering and I said to myself, we are a bunch of miserable souls here. You know, not really knowing what to do and how to do it. Today we're again in transition. We're transitioning out of the pandemic. And like we made the stop on the green from the meeting house over there to the chapel where we started our Zoom services. I think Amy said the date was 15th.
Oh, that was on the calendar.
Yeah, 22nd of March. But we made a stop on the green then, and we're coming the same route, just in the opposite direction now, back to the meeting house. And today is different. A mask is no longer a strange thing. It is strange when you take your mask off. I still can't figure out the rules. You know, when to have it on and when to have it off, so I just put it on. Then there's no difficulty for anybody. And it's not a political statement for me. It's just, you know, I don't want an argument either way or put people in danger and so forth. So a mask is no longer a strange thing, and social distancing is no longer a strange thing. What is strange now is to be in other people's company. It still amazes me that the thing that we have been longing for so long, when it starts happening, you don't actually know how to do it. You have to think it through, and you sort of bumble along. You have to make it up. It's a new experience for us. It is transitioning uncomfortably into what we thought we are familiar with and that came naturally to us. So entering the pandemic was a difficult transition. Exiting the pandemic to normal life seems to me to be somewhat of a stressful experience again, a learning curve for us again, being in transition, and it will be a new experience for us. Also as a church, learning how to be church in person again, with the option of Zoom and with the option of community TV as well. So that's going to be interesting to me to see where the chips will fall, which selection we will make, whether to gather in person or to watch on Zoom while we eat our breakfast and while we stay in our pajamas, or whether we'll come to the meeting house to be with each other. It was for me an emotional experience as well this morning, to see people, especially those that have had difficulties during this pandemic, that are still grieving. And there's a lot of personal interaction that has fallen by the wayside, that is lost, that we have to pick up on again. But I think for most of us, this was, even though it was strange, a good experience to be here with each other. We read in that passage, or when we listened to Steve reading the passage, there's a lot of talk about tents in that passage in Exodus. We read there a bit of a story about a people also in transition, Israel in transition from bondage and slavery, transitioning to a more settled existence in the promised land. And they were apart from the tents that they were living in, because we read in the passage that each Israelite would stand at his or her own tent to observe the comings and goings of Moses as he moved from their encampment, their base where they set up camp, to a tent that Moses pitched out far away from the encampment. A tent that he called the tent of gathering. Now they were, apart from the tents that the Israelites lived in, as I said, two important tent structures in their existence as they transitioned from slavery, being liberated, and live in their own land. The first was the tabernacle, which was a very intricate tent structure with lots of partitions and lots of no-go zones. Ordinary folk can come to here, the priest can go to there, and then there in the innermost sanctuary, that's only for the high priest, because there was the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence with Israel, right there in the most holy, in the inner sanctuary of the tabernacle, that elaborate tent structure. That was a place of regulated access that had to be mediated by the priest, by the, in today's terms, the clergy, and the priests and the high priests. They could decide who goes in where, and when you were not holy enough or pure enough to appear or to enter into a certain place. And these regulated interaction, this regulated access to God, was mostly, at least in the Israelite mind, for the protection of the people. Because if you would read the passage just before this one, you will see that in this process of Israel learning what it means to be a covenant people, how to be in relationship with God, God was angry and he said, God said, my holiness will consume you. You stubborn people, you disobedient bunch. My holiness will consume you. And therefore, to protect the people, the priests had to prevent them from coming into the presence of God so that they are not destroyed and consumed by the presence of God, the holiness of God. And then we find this other tent, the tent of gathering that Moses pitched far away from the encampment. And what do we read about that tent? We read anybody could go there. Moses wasn't a priest. He was a regular guy with a huge job, a very important job, that he really didn't want, but okay. God convinced him to take it. So there he was, leading this people, these recalcitrant Israelites, from the nice capital of the world, the center of civilization, into the desert, to some land that they said lies ahead, 40 years away, according to the scriptures. So Moses pitched this tent. Anybody could go there. And then when Moses went there to experience the presence of the Lord and to have a conversation with the Lord, with God, there was the sign of God's presence, this cloud and the pillar of fire. But anybody could go to that tent. This was a different kind of gathering. A very different social atmosphere because it wasn't regulated. There was no priestly class telling you, you can go in, no, you're a bad one. Not today. Go purify yourself. Nobody was afraid of God to be consumed by God's holiness. And the Bible even says God talked to God like with a friend. Not regulated, immediate presence of God for everybody. Not on merit, open for everyone to go to the tent of gathering. When I looked at this passage, I thought to myself, Moses was a good risk manager. He pitched that tent far away from the encampment, just to be sure if God would get angry with somebody that it wouldn't hit too many people in the encampment. So it was, as I say, a good risk management for Moses to put it far away. And the second thing that I thought about Moses, I thought to myself, Moses not being a priest, he must have got tired of his brother-in-law, Aaron, and the rest of the priests running the show. Telling him what to do and not to do, and who can go where and who can do what. So I think for Moses, it was a nice break as well to just say, okay, I just want to be a regular guy, talk to God, check out and chill out there in this tent of gathering where everyone is accepted, where God is present. And God's presence is immediate. I think this story about this people transitioning from over there in Egypt to over there in Canaan has something to say for us, transitioning from over there, the chapel, and the full digital existence, to over there in that meeting house. Yes, like for Israel, it will be a new experience and a learning curve for us as well. And about experience, I have a good friend. I was in business with him for some time, but for my own good, I decided, no, it's not going to work. But he used to say, you know, it's good to gain experience in life, but I'm tired of having all the experience and the other guys end up with the money. So for us, having the experience of transitioning again, gathering in this tent, that we can call the tent of gathering, because I think it speaks to two core aspects of our identity. That was similar to that tent of gathering that Moses pitched away from the priests and from the difficulty of a regulated life where God was feared and access to God was only for certain people under certain conditions. I think it speaks to us and our identity of being open, where everybody is welcome and where God's presence is immediate for everybody, no matter who you are and where you are, no matter what you are, what your position is, your status is, what your assets are. That is irrelevant in your relationship with God. But as Israel was transitioning and learning what it meant to also transition into full relationship with God, what the covenant means, for us being open and welcome and experiencing the immediacy of God's presence in us and around us, there is also this learning curve that is a constant one, of us transitioning into understanding what it means to be God's people and to live in covenant with God, to live in the agreement with one another and with God collectively, that we are God's people. We are God's people, which means that we follow in the footsteps of Jesus, which means that we subscribe fully and commit fully to living the great commandment, to love God, to make God's love for us the most important thing in the world, and to structure our whole lives around that, and to express it in whatever we do and wherever we go, no matter what transition we're busy with. I think the tent and the temporary existence of us having this for one Sunday and then moving again also speaks to the transitory nature of us as creatures. Nothing in us and of us are permanent. There is literally nothing. We are passing through. We are process. We are part of process. And that should not depress us, but it should and live in us and encourage us, no matter what our conditions and circumstances are, to live a life that reflects the wonder and the mystery of God's love as individuals, as families, as a gathering under this tent. As people gathered on Zoom, we're experiencing this through community TV. To live fully. And the time that we are granted to be part of this process, this wonder of life. To live fully in that, in God's Spirit. Because then the transition will enable us to be transformed as well, to change into a new way of living and to be transformative in the world, towards each other in this community and in the world. To be able to transform the culture where it is toxic, where it is damaging to life, where it is harmful to so many people. And let us continue with that transition, with this process, but as transformed people, transforming reality around us so that it becomes a life-giving environment. Let us, gathered in this tent, as we transition from there to there, remember Moses and his tent, transitioning from bondage to freedom, transitioning from just existing to a life transformed in the Spirit of Christ. May that be how we journey from this day forward. Amen.